Hello, my name is Bradshaw, and I'm delighted to have this opportunity to discuss and talk about this magnificent species, with the express purpose of deepening our understanding and respect for these ancient cultures, and increasing our ability to protect and support the self-determination of orcas. A few years ago, a group of eminent neuroscientists gathered at Cambridge University in the United Kingdom and made an announcement. It's since been called the Cambridge Declaration of Consciousness. It's a several-page document, but the gist of it is in this sentence here, that humans are not unique in possessing the neurological substrates that generate consciousness. And that's illustrated here in these photos. In other words, all animals, and they include invertebrates such as the octopus, share the same brains with us, and hence also the same capacities of consciousness, cognition, and emotions. So as you're looking here, you can see all these different brains, and they have different kinds of sizes and morphologies, but basically the fundamental structures and processes are the same. So essentially neurosciences has leveled species differences to cultural differences, and we can look at brain differences as more like one theme, one unitary model of the brain with a bunch of different variations. This implies that birds, reptiles, fish, mammals, including orcas, have the same cogs and wheels, brain structures and processes that we do, which govern thinking, emotions, consciousness, and the diverse subjective experiences that we enjoy. It also means that there is bidirectional inference. What we know about our own brain, our own experience, our own minds and emotions can be applied to other species, such as a chimpanzee or an orca, and vice versa. Now, that has been a tradition, and it's a routine practice in science to study the brain, the mind of non-human animals, chimpanzees, dogs, cats, rats, horseshoe crabs, etc., as a surrogate to understand our own minds and our own brains. Now, those are called animal models. However, the other direction, taking what we understand about ourselves and applying it to other animals, was called anthropomorphism, attributing human qualities to non-humans, and that was considered a no-no. But in fact, it's consistent with what the science says. So in other words, the neurosciences say that what we know about ourselves can be applied to other animals. And this was actually really poignantly illustrated and quantitatively with the diagnosis of wild elephant post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, where a formal diagnosis was made of PTSD of elephants who had been subjected to a series of violent assaults by humans and developed a condition of post-traumatic stress. And that was possible, and that diagnosis was valid because elephants and humans, orcas, all other animals share the same kind of brain and the psychological capacities to be vulnerable to post-traumatic stress. So again, bidirectional inference is the fact that we can make these inferences from ourselves to other animals and vice versa with equal robustness. So that means we have a very strong foundation, scientific foundation, that can predict certain things. So for example, we would say that a bear would enjoy themselves, may enjoy the sensual pleasure of lying on their back after eating and enjoying the sunshine. And if we have that observation and we see that, then it is valid. It's not just an anecdote anymore because it has a solid scientific framing. And if it's consistent, if our observation is consistent with the scientific foundation, the scientific theory, then it is a valid datum. Another case here, that neuropsychology predicts that sharks, fish, will have the potential to feel maternal feelings toward their young. Again, if, as marine scientists have observed, sharks do show that kind of emotion and that kind of behavior, then it is validated and it's consistent with what is predicted by neuropsychology. Language has always been used as something which is exclusively human. But when you take a step back again through that neuroscience lens, all animals have language. Ours happens to be with words and that we write things down, but all animals have sophisticated languages. In fact, they're probably even more sophisticated than ours because they're totally embodied with their environment and are using and have not let atrophy like we have as modern humans, these other channels of perception and communication. Bears and other animals also have what psychologist Daniel Goleman calls emotional intelligence, the capacity for empathy, the capacity for self-regulation, etc. And also grief. Now, reptiles are considered to be, have a reptilian brain, meaning it's of a lower order, it's more simplistic, it's more quote-unquote primitive than the human brain or mammalian brain, but that's not true. They have the same brain that we do in terms of the basic structures and processes and capacities, the mental capacities and emotional capacities. So then when we see this is a male rattlesnake who is embracing a female rattlesnake who was his companion and has been killed by a mountain bike, then again, what we would look at this, given the neuropsychological prediction, would be that there is a capacity for grieving and mourning. And so this observation seems consistent with what is predicted. So again, neurosciences and psychology have created this trans-species psychology, a unitary model of brain, mind, behavior, and consciousness. That is a foundation that goes across species. But there are differences, and a large part of those differences have to do with the fact that different animals have developed and evolved in different ecological niches. So we have an orca who has evolved in a marine environment. We have a lion who has evolved in a savanna environment, etc. And so then you'll have a bat that has echolocation, or you have a rattlesnake that uses IR for detection to navigate his or her landscape. So there are those ecologically, co-evolutionary differences. But there's other differences as well. And that comes across of why, for example, haven't sperm whales, rattlesnakes, black bears, the octopus, orcas, and tribal peoples like the Quechua shown here, why haven't they invented an airplane, computers, guns, and effected genocide and mass violence? Well, in the past, it was tacit that native people were not as smart, they were primitive, and it still is a belief that the animals are less than. But again, we now know that science has shown, inarguably, that all the animals and tribal people, of course, have the capacity to create and do these things that quote-unquote modern humanity has done, but they have chosen not to. So the question is, why? Why is it that we do what we do or don't do what we do? Why haven't orcas created airplanes? Why haven't they created guns? And why has our particular modern humanity, which is a deviation from the most of our genus, of the Homo genus, why have we chosen to go down this path? So there's another example in Orca culture. There is no record, and this covers thousands of years because tribal peoples have lived with orcas for thousands of years. There is no record of an orca harming or killing a human. The exception to this are orcas who are in captivity. So in order to get down into, say, how do we become who we are, we have to look at the evolution, the development of the self. So who we are determines what we do and how we do things. Over the last 2 or 3 decades, neuroscientists and psychologists have really discovered that our brain, our minds, our sense of self does not evolve in a vacuum. We're not like a bunch of billiard balls knocking around interacting with each other. Rather, we develop in this relational milieu. In other words, our brains and our minds are shaped by these relational experiences from inception onward. So this holds for an orca. where you have the primary bond is the attachment figure, which is typically the mother, but it can be the father or any other caregiver or a constellation of caregivers. So the idea is that the interactions, which are neurobiological, which are social, the touching, the kissing, the tasting, all of those kinds of communiques from the adult or adults to the infant, to the baby, the chick, the calf, really tunes the infant's brain. So you're really getting the neuroendocrinal, the neuro and the hormonal pathways in the brain, if we're looking at this through the model of neurosciences, is happening in relationship. So this is this microcosm in which an individual is born into, a microcosm, and this tuning then is really helping that individual anticipate what they will need, what kind of behavior, what kind of knowledge they will need in the environment they're evolved to occupy as an adult. So this notion of a sense of self then leads to, and the self-development leads to an internalized ethic, where we have an ethic defined as moral principles which guide and shape behavior. So in the orca world, you have the strong attachment is the mother and the baby. So you have a very, very strong relationship. And this is true in a number of different species, particularly ones where there's nursing and things like that, where this is very intimate. For example, a grizzly bear. Grizzly bears, typically the babies are born in hibernation, during hibernation, and they're with their mother for 3 years, 3 hibernation in the den and then wandering around with her. So these are very intense times when you have this brain-to-brain dialogue and tuning which goes on. But when we look a little bit deeper into the natural history of orca society, we see that there's not just that single attachment bond, but rather a constellation of bonds which goes across space and time with all the other members in the pod, and then this scales up to greater spatial and temporal scales in the ecotype and so on. So we're really looking at this constellation or a network of relationships which are all contributing to the shaping of the mind and the brain and the emotions and the ethics, the moral code, that knowledge that's being inculcated in the infant. Now, as us modern humans, we tend to see our species and our lives as separate from the rest of nature. But when you're looking at wildlife, they're totally embodied, totally integrated with the ecological as well as the social environment. So we can think about not just individual relationships, but rather that the baby orca is born into a field, a social and an ecological field, and that the relationships which influence his or her brain and moral principles come from interactions with the water, with the plankton, with the other plants, and with the other animals in the ocean. So when we zoom back even farther in space and time, we can think of an individual orca like Lolita, like Tilikum, as a fractal of this very complex fractal which has been existing for thousands of years. And so we get this knowledge and we get this moral code which is transmitted generation after generation after generation. And it's this that's passed on which really comprises the core, you can call it sort of the backbone of orca cultures and societies, their moral, their cultural mores, etc. So again, what you're looking at when you see someone like Tilikum is you see the embodiment of thousands of years of orca history and interactions and experience. Now, when we look just sort of in general ways, we make a comparison between the natural history and what we understand about orca psychology, orca ethics, orca culture, etc., and some tribal peoples, for example, like the Quechua, we find that there's a lot of similarity between their values and the way in which that they raise their children and live their lives. This is a quote from Justo Oja, who is a teacher, a Quechua teacher who lives in the Andes. And he talks about the community in which he lives, the Ailu, which we can think of in the orca world, is the pod which is nested within these other layers of the environment, social and ecological environment. So this is what he describes. The community, the Ailu, is not only a territory where a group of people lives. It is more than that. It is a dynamic space where the whole community of beings that exist in the world lives. This includes humans, plants, animals, the mountains, the rivers, the rain, etc. All are related, like family. He goes on to conclude, it is important to remember that this place, the community, is not where we are from. It is who we are. For example, I am not from Huantura. I am Huantura. Anthropologist Inga Bolin talks about the Chilahuani children. They're related to the Quechua. And she says this, Chilahuani children are loved and appreciated within the immediate and extended family and the community. They are never left alone, but are always with a caregiver. The children are polite, responsible, compassionate, curious, adventurous, and courageous, even at a very young age. I have never seen a child being beaten or treated roughly. So we can see, this is from a tribal human, but we can see, kind of get a parallel reflection, a little bit of an insight in terms of how the orcas are functioning. Because when you look at, they're a very conservative, ancient culture. And they are very nurturing, they're very caring, they have these bonds which are not just two beings together. These are bonds that extend deep into space and time. They're down to the core, into every single cell. So we can think about Orca culture then is something that is not just this assemblage that passes through time. We're talking about dimensions at the genetic level that are profound, that are almost fathomless in space and time. And again, it's like an individual is a fractal of this great history. So then we might ask the question then, why is it that orcas, bears, etc., the Quechua, have not created planes and guns and computers and engaged in mass extinctions and genocide? It's not because of lack of any brain or mental shortfall. It's because their ethics has precluded them going down the path that our particular modern humanity has gone. Now, I don't know the reason for that, but we can say that essentially it was at some point, these are ethical decisions, that the way they live their life, the values of their life, how they are with each other, precluded going down a path that was parallel or the same that our species has done. So then we might revisit Tilikum, Lolita, and others and say, particularly Tilikum, who killed three humans. Why did that happen? That is not killing humans is like a taboo in Orca culture. It is something that is not done. So what was it that made him basically break this ascetic vow? Something that is so deeply ingrained that essentially in this kind of notion that we might think that if you do that, then in human cultures they talk about taboos. When you break a taboo, when you break a core moral principle, then you are no longer part of that society. You have violated the core belief and values of the society. So what was it that made that orca Tilikum and other orcas who were in captivity do what they did? Well, it's an obvious answer. All of the orcas who are in captivity, or have been in captivity, have suffered a series of traumas. There was the capture, this is Pen Cove picture. There was the trauma of being taken away from the family, the physical and psychological trauma of being netted and translocated, the kind of demeaning training, quote unquote, enslavement in captivity, the kind of physical and psychological deprivations which lead to symptoms of complex PTSD, stereotyping, bobbing back and forth, hitting their head, committing a kind of a suicide, all of these kinds of poor health and mental quote-unquote disorders are really the symptoms of tearing that soul, tearing that individual away from the fabric of this incredibly dynamic and ancient tapestry that's called Orca culture. And then, again, this is a very poignant picture, you know, being held behind glass, being cut away from their world and cut away from any kind of nurturance that they would normally enjoy. So all of these are traumatic assaults on the soul, on the Orca soul and the Orca psyche. And so we can think of, why did Tilikum break that moral principle of not killing or harming humans? Why did he and why have others in captivity done that? Well, we can say maybe it was madness, maybe it was he didn't know where he was. But I think Emily Dickinson says it most beautifully when she writes in her poem, and a plank of reason broke. So we can speculate, and I do in the book of Carnivore Minds, where I talk about Tilikum and Orca Ethics. I do talk about that, and I do speculate to a certain extent, and we will never know. But the point is that it's less. What's most important is understanding how he broke this Orca vow and what drove him to it. That's the most important of what has been done to him and other Orcas that have made him violate this profound, ancient, core moral principle. So then what can be done? The fabric of Orca society has been rent. And it continues in terms of the things that we do: noise, boats, explosions, exploitation, capture, killing, all of those kinds of things basically tear apart the fabric. So what can we do to help knit that back? Well, one, this is Lolita here, is one we can release. I'm just saying things that everyone is talking about, but we have a scientific foundation and a moral obligation to bring back, to release these individuals into their homeland, into their families again, into a way of beginning to heal, and refrain from all of the things that actually do cause harm to the Orca culture and other animal wildlife cultures. No hunting, no explosion, no killing, no capture, refraining. For us as a species, we've taken over the planet. We need to pull back so that others can actually live. It means also we need to reduce our population. We need to minimize our ecological footprint. And all of that really is bringing us back into resonance, bringing us back into the harmony of an Orca ethic. And it's essentially embracing an Orca ethic, which will really be a renewal for our own society. So all of this is resonant with the wonderful work of the Orca Network and others who are striving to release Lolita, striving to release these captured individuals back into the water, and also to be able to, stop the dams, break the dams, so that these individuals can live their life. They've had their livelihood taken away. So if we can just take back the things we've taken, or give back, and refrain, then we will be able to be supporting Orca self-determination and the revitalization of these ancient cultures. This is what we're working toward, is seeing all Orcas be able to enjoy this kind of life again and the dignity that they once had. So thank you very much, and I'd like to thank the number of people who have contributed photographs to this presentation. I talk more about this in my book, Carnivore Minds, about Orca Ethics and the other wildlife, other quote-unquote carnivores who are so vilified and have been exploited. But that gets into sort of the different perspectives, seeing the wildlife from the inside out as best we can. Again, thank you very much.